Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 448. This program is in merit of Baruch ben Yamin ben Menucha Lana and Miriam bas Chaya Sarah Altois, Yukusil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Todrus, by Miriam and Sarah bas Rachel Altois. This week is Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. So we'll begin with discussing that, being that it's the most prominent and timely event and special day. We'll also speak about this week's parsha, Behar-Bechukosei, and many other interesting topics. Please go to chassidusapply.com, which is the home of this program, chassidusapply.com, where you can submit any question completely anonymously, as well as see all the previous episodes, the archives, as well as other resources, including the essays and the creative submissions of previous years, and other Chassidic resources, classes I've given on Samach Vav, Ayin Beis, Tzadik Daled, and more. And of course, I invite you to my daily morning class in Ayin Beis, every morning live on Zoom and on YouTube. You could check out all the details there on chassidusapply.com. Okay, so Lag BaOmer, a very unique and special day. I personally witnessed it every year. The Rebbe's focus, of course, everyone knows the special parades that were held for children that the Rebbe initiated back in early years, beginning of his Nesius and leadership, and even prior to that, actually, as well as in general the Farbrengens that the Rebbe held and the Maimorim that he delivered on Lag BaOmer. Now, this was my own personal experience, but we know Lag BaOmer goes back in history all the way back to the two big events that happened on this day, as the Rebbe would always emphasize. One is the day when Paschal Lomos, the epidemic that broke out of this 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who passed away during the days of the Omer, which is why we don't do weddings and other celebrations, that ended because they did not honor each other. Leinogo covered zeh b'zeh, so there's an epidemic and 24,000 students died. This stopped on Lag BaOmer. So that's more of the ending of a negative. On a positive note, Lag BaOmer is the Yortzeit, Yom Stalkus Hilula of the Rashbi, of Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai. Now you may say, okay, there were many great sages, Tanoim, that passed away, and yet Rashbi asked specifically that this day be Yom Simchosei, should be a day when we should celebrate. As explained in the Zohar, there's a whole section called the Idra Zuta, small group or the small gathering of the students of Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai. Just for the record, there's an Idra Rabba and an Idra Zuta. The larger gathering or the larger group of students and the smaller one. In parsha Nosei in Zohar is a section called Idra Rabba. And in parsha Hazinu in Zohar is a section called Idra Zuta. These are some of the most esoteric and complex and cryptic sections in the mystical text called the Zohar. The Zohar, of course, is authored by Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai, written down by his student Rabbi Abba. And there, in the Idra Zuta, he documents actually the last days of the Rebbe, of the Rashbi's life, including when he asked that it should be a day of celebration. This has been discussed and explained in many Maimorei Chassidus to explain the significance of this day. So why Rashbi? I said, Rabbi Akiva, his teacher. Rabbi Akiva, Kula Liba de Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest, if not the greatest sage in the Talmud. So Rashbi is unique in the fact that besides the great qualities and virtues that Rabbi Akiva said about him, and that we find in so many different Maimorei Chazal, that he was among the sages themselves of a different caliber, he was also, in the revealed way, the one who joined together both the revealed part of Torah and the inner and the secret part of the esoteric. What the Zohar calls Gufa Daraisa and Nishmasa Daraisa, the body of Torah and the soul of Torah. The body, we find Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai, one of the iconic Tanoim, sages, Mishnaic sages, that's quoted so often, Rabbi Shimeon, Stam Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai. And of course the Zohar is the classic work, the Zohar, the Book of Splendor. This is the work that the Rashbi taught his students. As I said, Rabbi Abba documented it. It's probably the classic book of Kabbalah, upon which so much else is based. So these two things, the Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai joined together, and indeed, Lag BaOmer became a special day from the beginning till this day. You see the pilgrimages. You have 500,000, who knows the numbers, that gather in Miran each year. Miran is the place where the Rashbi's Ohel is, and they celebrate exactly as Rashbi. Books have been written. There's a book by Rabbi Margolius that he wrote several, Shivchei Rashbi, Hilula de Rashbi, where he gathers together all the statements of the Rashbi and everything said about him, and indeed we sing those praises. So Rashbi stands out in that sense. He was actually one of the students of the Rabbi Akiva that survived that epidemic, indicating that he epitomized the love of for one another, as Rabbi Akiva himself said, "V'haftarecha kamecha zeh klal gadol b'Torah." So there's much that can be said, but what do we take away from it on a personal level? Lag BaOmer, the uniqueness of Lag BaOmer, is the critical need of joining the body and soul of Yiddishkeit today more than ever. So with the revelation of Kabbalah after the Arizal, who said mitzvah legalizei sachachma, that until that time it was still something that only Yechidus Geulah Rashbi had his select students. And as the Mishnah says, "En dershem ma'aseh makava ela b'yachid." You study these esoteric teachings individually in a very discreet manner. So in the time of the Arizal said, now the mitzvah has become to reveal this inner wisdom. And then it just accelerated with the students of the Arizal, ultimately leading to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Geulah of Torah Chassidus, and then Torah Chassidus Chabad, continuously accelerating the revelation of Pnimiyus HaTorah. Why? Why was it once discreet and kept for a very select few, Yechidus Geulah individuals, and then it became more known? So the basic, obvious reason is generally matters that are so sublime and so subtle, not everybody can appreciate. And if you just put it out there, it can be abused, it can be misunderstood, it can have all kinds of different distortions. And we've seen different movements, Shabtai Tzvi, Jacob Frank, who distorted Kabbalistic ideas in the worst possible way. So you have to be very careful how it's taught. Even Torah Shabbat, even the Nigla, even the revealed part of Torah, was also Torah Shabbat Peh for many years. The written Torah was written down, but most of it was oral, also passed on from teacher to student, until it became clear that it had to be written down or else it would have been forgotten. But there's something even more involved here. In the earlier generations, it was perhaps not necessary for every person to know all the inner dynamics of the soul of Torah. The main thing was to live by God's laws, knowing that there's a neshama. And by Mattan Torah, of course, you see right away it was a mystical experience. It wasn't just a legal experience, where they learned the laws of They saw divinity, and they experienced it. They saw the sounds, they heard the sights. There was lightning and thunder. It was a divine revelation. So it was always part of Judaism. You read through the Torah itself. Moshe, at Avram Avinu, God appeared to him. It wasn't just he was following God's moral laws. There's a divine experience going on. But this was unique to those that had the experience. Those that didn't have it, called the masses, if you wish, if there's such a thing, was most important was to follow the guidelines. Like you see, not everyone's a doctor. Not everyone is necessarily a physicist. I'm using just an example, has to know all the inner workings. But as the years rolled on, so two things changed. First of all, the darkness got stronger. Alienation, assimilation, disorientation, where many people felt disconnected for the different reasons that this happened. And there was a need, when there's more darkness, you need more light. The example that the Alter Rebbe gives the example to one of his colleagues, who said, when he saw a page of Chassidus fell to the floor, he said, you see, by spreading it, it's being not appreciated, it's being misused. And the Alter Rebbe gave the famous example of a king whose only son, the heir to the throne, fell very sickly ill and was on his deathbed. And the doctors couldn't save him until one doctor said that perhaps if you crush that stone, the most precious stone of the king's crown, that made the crown so unique, and you mix the powder with liquid, with water, and we can get it through the clenched teeth of the comatose child, maybe that will save him. It was a doubt. And much of it would probably spill on the floor. And it was the most precious stone. And the king, without hesitation, of course. What do I need this crown? What do I need this whole kingdom if my heir to the throne will be lost? So the Alter Rebbe said, so this precious stone, Torah B'chlal is called Chem de Gnuza, a hidden treasure. But especially Pnimiyus HaTorah, because the child, the Jewish people, were spiritually becoming in a comatose state. Besalfus is the expression, like in a faint state. That's why the necessity to dig deeper, similar to what it says in Chassidus about when you go to war, for the Netzachim, to win the war, the king will splurge and will give out the bizbuz ha'etzes, even the treasures that have been concealed and never been used. Same idea. When it comes to life and death, God forbid, of your own child, you do whatever it takes. So God said, this time has come now to reveal the deeper secrets. Perhaps it will get into the teeth of the comatose or the faint child. And that's indeed what Chassidus came to do, was to revive. What do you need to do? You need to reach deeper into the soul. So you have to reveal the deeper parts of the Torah. So when things are going, so to speak, regular, when I say regular, I mean it's a healthy environment. So a healthy environment, you don't necessarily need to dig that deep. You rely that the deep forces are there, and you do Torah and mitzvahs, follow the laws, and the deeper forces will do their job. And those people, the Yechidei Geulah, like Rashbi, know what needs to be done on that deeper level. But when a situation is more of a crisis, then you need to dig deeper. And we see indeed Chassidus saved so many people's lives. Many people who got trapped, either mechanical or robotic Judaism, mitzvah sanoshim alamoda, just doing it by rote. So many people who are looking for something deeper did not find that they can find the connection there, relevance. And indeed, many people went seeking elsewhere. So Nishmasa Daraisa literally revived and brought chayes to a passion, an excitement, and a deeper Pnimiyus to the Jewish people. That's one reason. The second reason given is, as we get closer to Mashiach, Mashiach is Tirasa Shal Mashiach, is Pnimiyus HaTorah, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Pnimiyus HaTorah, as Rashi says in the beginning of Shir HaShirim, Shakenim and Shikas Piyu, will be the revelation of the inner dimension of Torah, the soul of Torah. So as we get closer to Mashiach, especially in the 6th millennium, which compared to Friday, like the 6th day of the week, so Erev Shabbos, you begin to taste from the foods of Shabbos, of the 7th day of Shabbos, Yom Shekul Shabbos, U'Menucha L'Chai Elamim. And the Rebbe explains in a beautiful Sikha, in a Yutas Kislev Sikha, in Chelik Tazvav, volume 15, he explains that these two reasons are interdependent, because right before the dawn is the darkest time of the night. So in order to counter the darkness, and you need to reach deeper, what are you reaching with? With a taste of Tirasa Shel Mashiach to help us deal with the challenges, but also to prepare us and understand a reality when the divine will be completely revealed in existence. And that is essentially what Pnimiyus HaTorah is. And Rashbi, it says in the Samach Vav, that Lag BaOmer is the Mattan Torah of Pnimiyus HaTorah. Because Rashbi represents the Zohar, the Mattan Torah of Pnimiyus HaTorah, and that's why it has even more significance, especially in the later generations, though it was celebrated over all the years. So that's a bit of overview of the history and also the significance of Lag BaOmer. What does it have to do with the first reason, which is that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped passing away? Because Lei Nogo Kovid Zeh B'Zeh. How is it possible that students of Rabbi Akiva could behave in that way? Besides the fact that they were such great students, they heard from their teacher that Klal God with Torah. What is the cardinal principle of Torah? Loving your fellow. How could those same students who heard their teacher go against that most important teaching. So Chassidus explains, the Rebbe explains it in many places, that it didn't come from their low level, it came from their high level because they were so passionate about their opinions. They could not tolerate. Like Behar-Bechukosei shel Chavere, it says, that one Talmid Chacham gets burned by the canopy of the second Talmid Chacham. So sometimes divisiveness comes from pettiness and from ignorance and just in general people's self-interest. But sometimes it can also come from greatness. Greatness could also conflict with others if you're lacking the proper bittul. If you have rotzeh without a shuv, if you have that yearning and longing, that can also consume you. Not from a bad place, the intentions are good, but you need to have a very profound level of bittul when you have such passion. It's like, think of someone who has a very strong opinion, and he's very correct in his opinion, and he's committed to it. His passion could hurt someone else, because sometimes you also need restraint. So the lesson that we learn is, yes, the negative consequences of divisiveness, but also the importance of Avos Yisrael. Avos Yisrael, Achdus. How does Avos Yisrael begin? Says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. Same idea. As long as Gufei Iker, if a person considers their body more important than their nefesh, their spirit, they'll never have true Ava. It's Hagbaras Atzur al-Chemer, spirit over matter. In other words, revealing the soul and not just the body. The soul, we're Kula Masimas, we're all part of one larger soul and one part of one larger entity, connected to God. That is the key to love. So the connection of body and soul is critical. That we're not just physical bodies. Materialism divides, spirituality unites. And where does that come from? It originates in Torah. So even though Torah does have two parts, a body and a soul, but a body and a soul work together. What's a body without a soul? God forbid it's a corpse. What's a soul without a body? It's not grounded. We need to make a dira b'tachtenim, a home for the divine in this world, and that requires body and soul together. So the body of Torah and the soul of Torah. So those that bring together those two are the source and connected to Avos Yisrael, to a fundamental love. And indeed, that's what Rashbi emphasized. Anon b'chvivusa talya milsa, he said. We are dependent on love. We are connected to love. And Rashbi epitomized what it means to love and to help others. As we're told the story in the Gemara that he had to hide from the Romans because of the decree that anyone studied Torah was the penalty of death. So him and Rabbi Lazar, his son, hid in a cave, miraculously survived 12 years, completely separate from civilization. So you can imagine how refined they became. When they came after 12 years, Rashbi was so spiritual and so refined that whatever he looked at, he saw the pettiness of people and life. Everything began to burn. Whether it's literal or figurative, but the idea is he couldn't tolerate his spirituality. Burned everything, was literally annihilating everything that he saw. So God said to him, listen to this, you're not ready yet. You have to go back one more year, 13th year. Not because of the decree of the Romans, but because you need the maturity, perhaps the bar mitzvah maturity that comes after 13 years, the moichin de gadlus, that instead of annihilating the world, I did not create the world for it to be destroyed, to transform that pettiness, to transform the material world, a deeper level of soul. And that's what happened. After one more year, it says, whatever was sick, Rashbi healed. Whatever was broken, he fixed. So interesting that even though you think his deep spirituality after 12 years seems quite powerful, but that's not life. It's not here to destroy, not to destroy one another, through dishonoring or disrespecting, and not through not tolerating the material world. We need to transform the material world, and for that you need to dig deeper into spirituality. And that's indeed what we are blessed with today, that we have the neshama and guf, and we see the critical need for it, for everybody to be studying it. That's why it says, Mashiach comes, it says even children will study Pnimiyus HaTorah, and indeed in the time of Rashbi, that was also the case. Because his Geulah was even reaching children. To a certain extent, it was obviously not reaching every man, woman, and child because it was still for Yechidas Geulah, but there was an element of that revelation that was affecting everybody. And that's one of the reasons that children have a special role on Lag BaOmer, and many other things. Rashbi was also Pekah Dakoris. He had a special gift to be able to help women who were infertile and unable to have children to open their wombs, because that again is the opening of a channel between the hidden and the revealed. The hidden potential to give birth and actually the power to give birth. And once Sikh Lag BaOmer Tafshin Mem, 1980, the Rebbe said that means not just physically but also spiritually and psychologically, that if parents and children have some rift, Lag BaOmer is a day that helps repair that rift, helps open up a channel between parents and children. That's why the Mittler Rebbe showed miracles, would go out in the field of Lag BaOmer, and especially in the area of blessings for those that needed children. So Lag BaOmer has tremendous power in that sense. The power of Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai, More, a person who mastered both the revealed part of Torah and the hidden part of Torah. So there's much more to say, but this is somewhat of an overview of Lag BaOmer and its relevance to us in our learning on this day from the Torah of Rashbi, both the Geulah and the Pnimiyus HaTorah. And in general, we're using this day, especially with children, to celebrate. And celebrate what? Celebrate through Torah, the combination of the soul and body of Torah. Someone asked the question, did the Rebbe suggest that people should visit the Ohel on Lag BaOmer? So I don't remember a directive like that, and someone can correct me if anybody knows a directive, but there is an interesting letter that the Rebbe wrote, which implies that there's an inyan to go visit the Ohel. Now we know there's the pilgrimages to Miron, as I mentioned before, and actually the Arizal would go and spend 3 days there. That's what it says in Kisvei Arizal. The Rabbi Chaim Vital writes about his teacher, his master. So going to the Ohel of Rashbi, that's clear. That we know. There's a Shtadchus al Kivrit Tzadikim connected to Lag BaOmer. What about the Ohel, the Rebbe's Ohel, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Ohel? So there's a letter in Igros Kodesh, is dated 25th of Iyar, Tofshin Yud Aleph, 5711, 1951. It's printed in volume 4, page 304. I'll just read a few lines, I'll translate. The Rebbe is writing actually to a Chassid, I believe it was a Belzer Chassid perhaps, or in London. He writes, Betach Yedei, you definitely know that the day of Lag BaOmer is the day that Rashbi himself called it Yom Simchasei, the day of his celebration. That was the day of his Istalkus. If you do a Gam came, you also know that Simcha Peiris Geder. Simcha breaks through all boundaries. And then the Rebbe writes, V'kriyas apan b'yem Simchas Rashbi. Reading apan, a pidya nefesh, a note that we write when we go to the Ohel, al tzion nisiyenu, on the tzion, which is the Ohel of nisiyenu, he's referring to the Rabbeim, but he's speaking obviously about his own father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe's tzion, shehu hu amagal rozeh teira b'dareinu zeh. Who this Yenu, our Rebbe, is the one, he is the one who's revealed the secrets of Torah in our generation. So therefore, by reading upon at his Ohel, on Lag BaOmer, and through his Torah, we all get bound together, Bilana Dechaya, the tree of life, which is he Pnimiyus HaTorah, and through that is the connection and the binding to the living God. So reading this pan on the Frierdiker Rebbe's Ohel, on the Rebbe and the Nisiyenu Ohel, who is the revealer of the Pnimiyus HaTorah of Rashbi in our generation, that has the power, because Simcha Peiris Geder, Yom Simchasei, lifrates, to pierce. Hesterim v'alam, the concealments and the covering, the coverings and the concealments, and to draw down for each individual everything he needs, but children, life, parnasa, all in expansiveness, and I hope that you'll be able to notify me of good news and regarding all the things of which you wrote about in your pan, in your pidya nefesh, which the Rebbe says, reading that on the tzion on Lag BaOmer. So that's pretty clear connection between Rashbi and the Rebbe of every generation, being that it's the Nasi of the generation, who's especially one who's teaching, teaching Pnimiyus Torah. So that's a pretty clear directive. Okay, so I mentioned the lesson of learning Pnimiyus Torah and combining the Pnimiyus and the Geulah, the body and the soul and the body. Also, of course, it's a day to increase in Avos Yisrael. I shouldn't neglect to mention that. Day to emphasize the power of Nagu Kavod Zeh B'Zeh, to show special respect and honor one another, despite of our diversity, even if you disagree with someone, even if you passionately disagree because of your Torah values, your Torah ideology, and even if you're justified in your Torah ideology, but never ever in a way that compromises our relationship with each other. Which, when a person learns Pnimiyus HaTorah, like he explains in the Geras HaKedesh, Simach Chavov 26, in the Geras HaKedesh, that Ilona Dechaya, the tree of life, does not have Tevarah. It brings purity, it brings love. Eitz Hadas is Tevarah. Nigla de Torah, as he explains there, doesn't mean, God forbid, there's good and evil. It means it talks about matters of good and evil. It talks about matters of divisiveness. Pnimiyus HaTorah is all about unity, about connecting to godliness and showing how the Hashem Echad, Achdus Hashem, permeates every part of existence. And above all, the human condition. Barcheinu Avinu Kolonu Ka'echad. That we're all blessed when we stand together. Okay, so the directive is very clear. So that let us now segue to lessons from parsha Behar-Bechukosei. Again, a combination of two chapters with which we will conclude the book of Vayikra, Chazak Chazak, 2 chapters. So what personal message does this parsha offer us? So briefly, quoting and citing from the Rebbe a number of places, speaks about these 2 chapters as often that they have a certain paradox. Bahar, when we say Bahar, Ahar is a very steady and steadfast entity, a mountain. It represents strength, it represents consistency. Bechukosei, especially Bechukosei Teilechu, represents movement. So here we have the combination of a steadfastness as well as movement. And you need both. Because in life, you need to have solid foundations, but you also have to have constant growth. Yelchu Mechayil al Choyel. Indeed, Bechukosei also has another element to it. Bechukosei from the word chekike. It's engraved. And when something's engraved, that's also a certain solidness. It means it's engraved within you. It's not like a superimposed entity. So the message that we have from Behar-Bechukosei is both the combination of having a certain solid foundation, solid roots, but you have to also be like a tree that spreads out, that grows, and is continuously moving forward. When you say halacha, halacha is both halacha, which means law, but also halicha, movement, halicha slay, which means movement, because halacha, yes, you cannot waver or change the laws, God forbid, but the laws have to be done with a Pnimiyus HaTorah, with a passion, that it's always said and always done differently. We say Shema Yisrael several times a day, but you're never supposed to be said the same way. Same words, but think of it like music. You play the song every time a little differently, with a different intention, with a different personalization. And that's the key, Bechukosei Telechu, to have both the element of Bechukosei, Chukah Chakakti, the idea that it's engraved, but Telechu. You're always in movement, you're always in flux, you're always alive. Life, by definition, is mobile. It's always movement, like a flickering flame. Never static, never stuck, never stagnating. So that's the lesson from one of the lessons from Behar-Bechukosei. Again, there's more to be said of this. I did discuss Behar-Bechukosei and connection to Lag BaOmer in previous years, and you can check that out again at chassidusapply.com. And just check by keywords. You can search if you want more information and material. Interesting, one year I spoke about the Gemara Moed Katan, which is connected to Rashbi and Rabbi Lazar B'nai, and this week's parsha Bechukosei talks about Kavyochel, so to speak, the things that are opposite of blessings, that really even that is also a blessing. That Rashbi revealed the inner, the soul of things that may sound sometimes harsh or sound like the opposite of a blessing, a klola, a curse, that too is really a revelation of something pnimiyusdik, of a deeper good. And I spoke about that. So go to chassidusapply.com, you can find previous year's discussions on many other connections of Lag BaOmer and Behar-Bechukosei. Okay. So with that, let me move to another question that followed up, since we're coming also, Lag BaOmer comes a few days after Pesach Sheni, which was on Friday. So, the lesson of Nishtokim Farfal, there's nothing lost, as we discussed last week. So someone wrote this following question, I thought appropriate to read. Lama Nigara. So that was the expression the Jews used. Why are we deprived? Because we couldn't bring the Pesach Rishon, we couldn't bring the Korban Pesach. On Pesach, why should we be deprived from such a powerful mitzvah? And that's when Hashem said to Moshe, give them Pesach Sheni. The opportunity to bring, on Pesach Sheni, a month later, to bring the korban. So right. When some people who are unable to bring the korban Pesach complain to Hashem that it's not fair, Hashem was impressed and moved that a group of people were upset and not being able to do a mitzvah, and he responded by giving us a new mitzvah of Pesach Sheni. But when we complain that the long Golus is unfair, and we are upset that we can't do the mitzvahs associated with the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, Hashem hasn't yet responded positively and sent Mashiach. How do we reconcile this? During Pesach and Pesach Sheni, only a small group of us were affected and not able to bring the korban Pesach, but today's long, harsh Golus affects every single one of us. So Kal v'chemer, even more so, Hashem should respond by sending Mashiach. Lama negara, why are we deprived? Well, I'm sure God is hearing that cry as you write it, and I'm sure reflects as well so many of our cries and our questions. But let me say this. Firstly, it's a very good question. And that's not my own line. It's lifted from the Rebbe. The Rebbe, the later years especially, the Rebbe would say, once we finish the Birurim, we finish the work, and we're at the threshold of Mashiach, so the Rebbe says, so why didn't Mashiach come yet? And many times the Rebbe responded. As I said, especially in the later years, he didn't say there's still something to do. He said, it's takakasha. It indeed is a question. So if the Rebbe could say that, we can say that as well. After all these years, after everything we've done and all our cries and all our suffering, it's high time that Mashiach should come, the Hechster Zeit, in the Rebbe's language. So I don't have an answer for that. But at the same time, we cannot be in any way dissuaded, and we can't be disappointed, and we can be resigned. We still take the lesson from Pesach Sheni, we still cry Lama Negara, and we still believe that our cries are heard. And every cry perhaps opens another door. For sure opens another door. So at the same time that we have a question, that doesn't stop us from moving forward. Questions don't stop us. The Rebbe once said in a Fabrengen, he said, Amunah, deep Amunah is such that a question doesn't make it weaker and an answer doesn't make it stronger. So we're entitled to ask, but sometimes we don't have an answer. And that doesn't mean that we get stuck. We don't have an answer, but we believe firmly that we're marching forward, and there'll be that one act and one word and one good thought that will tip the scale and bring Geulah v'tshuva v'atzola, loyal kol ha'olam kulei, personal and global redemption to one and all. But we still cry out, and it's good that you wrote that, and I'm happy to have read it. And I'm sure Hashem is listening to this program, as is the Rebbe, and may it finally pierce all the heavens, and more importantly, pierce it for sure does, and bring the result that we see, b'teva nidav nigla, we see it with our own eyes, b'einei basar, mamish, as the Rebbe would always emphasize, mamish, with mamoshes, tangible, concrete, down on earth. Okay. With that, let us move to some follow-up to previous, or follow-up or continuation of the discussion. In the past weeks, and I've gotten a lot of feedback to this, and I thank you for that, a lot of feedback on the issue of what is a soul in general, and what is a Jewish soul. So 2 weeks ago I began, what is a soul? Even though this is a topic I've discussed many times in this series called My Life Chassidus Applied, which is now already in the 10th year, I should mention. And we are, as I said, episode 448. But nevertheless, firstly, some issues are timeless, and we will go over them again and again. They could always use more emphasis, and every time try to add another point. And these are critical issues, understanding what is the soul, what is a neshama. We spoke before about the body and soul of Torah, the body and soul of human beings. So it's a very worthwhile topic that really is the undercurrent of so many other topics. So in continuation of this series, first what is a soul in general, and then what is a Jewish soul, I'll just sum up what I've said, and I want to continue because there have been more questions on this topic, and I want to address a few of them. Okay, so we spoke about a soul being essentially the idea of God's purpose within us. That when God chooses to create something, and this is everything, what does that mean he chooses to create? He invested, just like a composer of music chooses to create a piece of music. So every musical note, every nuance, every detail is all part of that plan. So a musical note is essentially God's expression of this song that he wants to sing. Each one of us on earth is an expression of God's divine plan. I used the example of composers, same example of an author. Every word, every phrase. So a phrase has the body of the phrase is the expression, the very tangible expression of it, but what is the soul within it, the spirit within it? That is the neshama. And everything therefore has a spirit that the Alter Rebbe brings from the Arizal. There's a nefesh hadeimemes even. There's even in a mineral, inanimate mineral has a nefesh. And a tzemeach, nefesh tzemeches, a spirit within vegetation, a spirit, the nefesh achiyunis, within animals, and there's a nefesh hamedaber in every human being. And then we spoke about chaviv adam shenivra b'tzelem, that every human being is created in the divine image. So then what makes a soul of a Jew unique? So I spoke about that last week. A soul, chvivin yisod, just like it says, chaviv adam shenivra b'tzelem, that precious is the person created in the divine image, every human being, chviv yisol, shenikroim bonim lamokim, and they're chviv yisol because they received the Torah. So there's an element of being a ben, a son, which has a more intimate connection and helps reveal the deeper purpose within everything else in existence. But the purpose is that everything in existence should declare and testify to God's glory. Everything God created is to reveal that soul within it. So we discussed this more at length last week. I'm not going to go over all the details. But the most important thing is to remember that everything has that type of purpose. But now that we're already speaking about a neshama, a Jewish soul, we discussed, and Alter Rebbe speaks in Tanya, Perek Beis, where he speaks about the idea of chelik elikam emal mamish, nefesh hashenis b'Yisrael. But it's not meaning that the nefesh, that a non-Jew does not have a soul. As the Rebbe makes clear in many places, and I gave some of the sources in last week's program, which again, I don't want to go over again. You can check that out. ChassidusApply.com, you can find that program. So what is he talking about? He's talking about this deeper connection. And indeed, the Jewish people showed the way, starting from Avram Avinu, and then when it was formalized and consummated at Mattan Torah, the Jewish people became a new nation, and they converted actually. They went through a giyur, committed solely to be Mamleches Kenim V'Gei Kadosh. Like it is among the Jewish people themselves, they're Kahanim, Levim, Yisraelim. There's Yisachar and Zvul. Yisachar is the scholars, Zvul are the business people. So in the general terms, the same idea in the world. There are those that involve more the people of the book, where their job is to lead the way, direct, to guide, to be the teachers, if you wish, people of the book, to teach and guide the world toward fulfilling what God's purpose is in every part of existence. And then there are those that are involved more in existence itself, in refining the world, the Shevis Yitzhara, turning it into a civilized universe. And these all complement each other. And you need both. The Rebbe once said in the Sikha, he spoke about Kinus HaShluchim Elomi, the global, the international Kinus HaShluchim. He said Elomi also means the power to change the world. And the world, he said, is dominated in numbers, in quantity, by the non-Jews. They're the largest percentage of the world. The Jews are a very small minority. And he said that quantity in Kedusha and holiness is also quality, because they have the power to actually civilize the world. The Jewish people, simply in numbers, can be everywhere. So there's a combined a joint effort here. And if we don't use if we take away egos and politics and other sideshows, and you just focus what everyone's mission is, it's very clear. Everybody has their particular mission, and we're all part of one larger mission, to transform this world into a world where it'll be Mola Orez Deis Hashem, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Oz Epech Elam Sofa Bruda, and all the nations of the world will be united by one God, each in their own diverse way. We're not seeking to convert anyone. Judaism doesn't seek to convert, because you can fully serve God, whoever you are, in your particular way. And yet there is a difference. There is a difference. There is lahavdil. Ben Yisrael la'amim. There is separate. There is a boundaries. There are different roles to play, and they need to be respected as well. Okay, so diversity is not a contradiction to being a joint effort, as I just explained. So someone wrote this question, which I'll repeat. I didn't read it last week. I'll read it now. Rabbi Jacobson, could you please provide a definition of our people, i.e. Jews, Yidden, not the who is a Jew halachic sense, and not the familiar nationalistic, ethnic, and ideological or religious senses? How did the Rebbe categorize us, if at all? I think I once saw somewhere that the Hasidic definition of the Jewish people is soul-based. I would appreciate the light you can shed on what meaning should be assigned to the word Jewish in the vernacular. Thank you. Okay, so I really answered the question, but I'll add a little more. The word Jewish in Hebrew, the simple word is Yehudi. Yehudi is a Jew. That's the word actually used in the Megillah. And the Gemara says, why called Yehudi? Yehudi because Yehudi is from the word Heidah, like Yehuda, like Moida Ani, Hoidu, Moidim. From the word acknowledging. That Yehudi is called Mishu Meida B'Hashem. Acknowledges God. Meida B'Chala Teira Kuli. Acknowledges Teira. So essentially it's a person who epitomizes and personifies the idea that I'm not a self-made person. All I am is acknowledging the Creator. I am here to be a channel of God's will in this world. And that's what defines a Jew. Now you'll ask the question, can a non-Jew reach that level? They could. In Torah, he explains about great non-Jewish people who committed their entire life to study and to pray and to connect. The Rambam says at the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yevel, I referred to that as well in the previous programs, the Loi Shevet Levi Bilvad, not just Shevet Levi, but Kol Ish V'ish Meboa Elam. All human beings, Meboa Elam means from those that, the citizens of the world. And the Rebbe explains, I mentioned last week, Likutei Sichos, volume 13, page 230, look at the footnotes. Where he said, Boy Elam Muchach, he says that it's Umas Elam as well. That anyone who separates themselves from materialism and from the folly, from Havli Elam, from the pettiness or the emptiness of material concerns, and focuses on the divine, he sanctifies himself in the sanctification of Holy of Holies, and the Rebbe brings there clearly how even a non-Jew can reach that level. Not getting now into the distinction, but the idea is that everybody can reach that level if they indeed choose to dedicate themselves. That's the key. Haman, who is the antithesis, the alter ego of Mordechai, was a self-worshipper. He wanted everyone to bow to him. So Mordechai Yehudi was the exact opposite. I don't bow to you, we bow to God. And the point is to teach everyone that. So the Jews first chose by their own volition with Avram Avinu and Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and the generations afterwards. They chose. Avram, at his own choice, rejected the pagan world that he grew up in. He rejected his father's home. Terach, who was an idol manufacturer. Whatever God you want, we'll make it for you. Avram Avinu became the Yehudi. Or Ivri, says Avram Ivri, because he stood on one side of the world, like Aver, the whole world stood on the other side of the river, so to speak. A nonconformist, a pioneer of recognizing that God is the true reality, and we are essentially a piece of that, an extension. And that acknowledgement is what epitomized what Jewish people are. And they taught it to the world. And the world slowly moved from paganism to faith, different faiths, and ultimately, when Mashiach comes, everyone will recognize that. Everything in creation will know that you created it, recognizing the divine force within us all. The Yehudi is the force that leads that way. That's one way to explain it all. There are many more ways. We talked about the Tanya Perek Beis, and Tanya goes deeper into what that soul is like. It has that power, a unique power, because when you have that divine power within you, like a child of the Father, you can actually actualize and lead the way in bringing the divine into our world. Because if you're made up of the world, it's hard to ein chavish matras atzmei. Someone in fetters cannot untie themselves. So in a way, a soul coming from another reality, a higher reality, a divine reality, has the power to transform. But a neshama also comes down into a body, and it has to engage with this world. And that's essentially the definition of our people. Atem tili mamlechas kainim v'gei kodesh. You shall be for me a mamlechas kainim, a kingdom of priests, kohanim, v'gei kodesh, and a holy nation. And demonstrate what holiness is. Kadeshim tiyu, sanctify yourselves. And bring Kedusha and Kiddush Hashem, sanctify God's name. And bring that Kedusha to everyone in the world, every person, every human being. And by extension, every animal. Not to put it in the same category. and every tzemeach, every vegetation, and every mineral. Our entire world permeated and saturated with divine awareness and higher consciousness. Another person writes, in continuing this discussion on soul, hello, I was watching your YouTube episode about Passover and the transcendence I experienced this, and the transcendence you discussed. I experienced this once, and it was pure love, sparkling, and an apricot glow. It was so powerful that I had to exit this place. My mother, whose father was Jewish, Mandy, his father was a rabbi. She considers herself to be Jewish. Her dad's dad was a rabbi in Austria. Her mother was not Jewish. My dad's mom was Jewish, from Poland. I just found this out, both parents Ashkenazi. I had both of my sons circumcised on the 8th day by rabbis. I am not considered Jewish by some people in 1983. Then anyone to my thinking that is Ashkenazi is not, if it is true that 4 women who brought the Ashkenazi gene pool in were not born of Jewish mothers. I'm not sure where this person got that from, but married into Judaism. That is an honest assessment in view of the evidence. So when you were talking about the Grateful Dead and other musicians, you said, and this guy, I can't remember his name, you made a point today saying his mother was Jewish. By these 1983 standards, no one of Ashkenazi Jewry can claim to be Jewish. I don't agree. I'm not sure why you're making that statement at all. If you have a Jewish mother, you're considered to be Jewish. If someone converts according to Jewish law, they're considered to be Jewish. But let me continue reading. As I always said, I want to read what people write. Please explain why the segregation and alienation of peoples who in their hearts and bones believe to be Jewish and are protective of the Jews. So sad. I really can't believe this. I'm listening. Yes. Okay, the answer is very straightforward. We don't decide who's Jewish, who's not. That's what God decides. It's a soul matter. It's not a matter of citizenship. It's not a matter of race, of culture, of choices. So to be Jewish, we know, is either you have a Jewish mother or you go through a conversion. It's called a halachic conversion that tells you how to do it. As I said before, the entire Jewish people went through this conversion. So no one's being discriminated against. Everyone needs to go through. It's like basically you want to take on this responsibility, this extra responsibility, and that's actually what we say. When someone not Jewish wants to convert, you say, what do you need this extra responsibility? You can serve God as you are. You're perfectly fine. Nothing's lacking. And indeed, becoming a Jew has more responsibility. You'll also be subject to discrimination and anti-Semitism. It's not that easy. This is not meant to alienate. This is meant to be honest. Now, if a person pushes themselves, despite all that they're being told and dissuaded, then you say, you never know what God's plan is. Maybe this person does have a Jewish soul. And that's why if they continue, insist, and the rabbis do go through the process, the person goes through the process of halachically legal conversion, then you say it's a ger shenizgayer, not a goy. You don't say a Gentile that converted, you say a ger, a stranger that converted, because it was a person who had a Jewish soul that went to a strange place, like a crossing of wires. But it's not a necessity, it's not something we even advocate. Because every person can serve God. So I'm not sure I'm just framing it. So you have to make a choice. You can serve God perfectly. Forget about whether you need to be called a Jew. If you don't have a Jewish mother, there's no discrimination. You can be completely godly as you wish to be. If something is pushing you, you feel you want to be defined as Jew. And I'm not talking about to be part of a club. We're talking about spiritually. So by all means, if that's what's driving you, so go speak to a competent and authoritative rabbis, halachic rabbis, who can tell you what the process is. They will dissuade you, as I just said, for the reasons I mentioned. At the end of the day, being Jewish is a responsibility. Yes, it's a gift, it's a blessing, but it's a responsibility. You have to be ready to assume that responsibility. If you're not ready, then it's fine. Keeping Shabbos, eating kosher, other things that are fundamental. And they all bring holiness into the world. But you can do so as a non-Jew in your particular way, completely fine. You're creating the divine image and you have the power to bring godliness into your life and in the life of your family and your community and the world around you. So that's my response. And it's not, again, about being discriminated against or not. This is a completely, if you wanted to become a citizen of the United States, it's a whole process. And that's not even a spiritual thing. It's a process. Are you loyal to the country? They want to make sure that you really want to become a citizen. They put you through a lot of difficulties. And for good reason. So this isn't about discrimination. It's about an understanding of expectations. Like you go to the military, for example, and you want to, let's say, be in the high elite military. You have to pass through certain standards and goals and also competence. And it's not a discrimination. Some people are made for that, some are not. And it's perfectly fine. Not everyone's going to be a teacher. Not everyone's going to be an author. Not everyone's going to be a spiritual mentor. We all can do so in our own sphere. But on a full scale, some people are very good at one thing, some people are good at another thing. And when we understand it in that context without egos, then we all have that bittul. We all complement each other in the large mosaic, in the large symphony, which is called the cosmic symphony of the divine creation. Okay. Next question. What about someone who has a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother? Why should this person not be considered Jewish? So I explained this just briefly to the previous questioner, because there are guidelines. There are many reasons given for this particular, but there are guidelines given to us by God, and that's how we follow them. Jewish mother, or someone that converts according to halacha, Jewish law. The fact that someone has a Jewish father, one of the reasons, first we'll talk the technical reason, it's much easier to identify a child with a mother because a child comes from the mother's womb. And a father, you can question sometimes that ancestry. Another point, spiritually speaking, the soul itself is defined by the mother, Jewish soul or not. The father defines the shape of the soul. What tribe? For example, you go by the tribe from Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Because a mother is connected so much more with the essential development of the soul in the context of what its role will be in this world. And a father is more in how that role is fulfilled. That's the brief answer. Next question. If a Jewish soul is exclusive, how is conversion possible? So I believe I answered that as well. And the answer is because sometimes a Jewish soul can end up, as I said, crossed wires if you wish, can end up in a place, whatever reason, mysterious reason. And the only way you know is that a person insists. What's pushing them to become Jewish? And what the rabbis have to establish is that it's sincere and that it's real. And if they do establish that, then you say he's a complete Jew as if he was born Jewish, without any difference. There's no second-class citizen. As a matter of fact, it says, treat the strangers, treat the ger well, because you were once a stranger in a strange land, and you were treated by God in a beautiful way, so treat the stranger well. Okay. So now let's go to this question. I'm listening to the Soul of Pesach Shir delivered at one of your classes, in which you mentioned the 600,000 souls, Neshamas Klolis, collective souls, which are then explained in relation to our work of redeeming the final 86 general sparks. So yes, I discussed that. You can find that online, and you can find links of that go to our website and just look for this talk that I gave, the Soul of Pesach. The whole idea of how souls come to this world and refine, and there's the collective souls, and then how they break down, and there's the collective 288 sparks, and today, after the Jews left Egypt, there were only 86 remaining, and we now have concluded the refinement of those sparks as well, as the Rebbe explains. So the question is, number one is, what is the meaning of the 600,000 general souls? And then continuing on, why don't we count the souls of those younger than 20 and older than 60? Could you please explain why only the men between 20 and 60 years of age and no one else, younger and older males and all females, had these neshamas, or counted among the 600,000? Also, please explain the how, when, why, where, and what of neshamas pratis and nesatzis pratis, meaning specific souls and specific sparks. What were or are there further shatterings of sparks and divisions of souls throughout history or to this day? Thank you. I understand that answering this question briefly may be a tall order, but if anyone can do it, your erudition and approachability through your anonymous question format makes you the one. Kol hakavod. Okay. So firstly, let's talk about the 600,000. It makes total sense. if you think about it with using an analogy, all souls originate in one soul. Like all human beings originate with one origin, one ancestor. Adam and Eve, who also began as one, an androgynous creature, male and female. They had children. Their children had children. And now we have 8 billion people on this planet. A good example for it, think of a tree. A tree develops, first there's just a seed, then it develops into a tree, and then it begins branching out. And the branches branch further out. So it makes total sense that there's first a collective, called collective branches, which each branch breaks down into sub-branches. The same thing with souls. And the same thing with sparks. The sparks are the divine spark, the divine intention and kavanah, the divine purpose in each object in creation. So overall there's 248, but we know there are a lot more than 288, I should say, 288 sparks. We know there are a lot more objects in this world. But think of it from a scientific point of view. They all go back to the basic molecules, basic atoms, subatomic, basic DNA. And then it branches out into the details. So the same thing is how the souls work. Why there's 600,000? So it says in Kabbalah, Chassidus speaks about the number, that number signifies a certain all-inclusiveness. But the 600,000 in turn break down each one into 600,000, which turns it into 3.6 million, and so on and so forth. And therefore, that's how the picture works. Now, those 600,000 all go back to one origin. Why did they designate 600,000 to the men 20 to 60? That's when the Jews left Egypt. So you consider the people who went to war, who were capable, fully functional, you count them. That doesn't mean that the men, women, and children, older and younger, of 20, younger than 20, older than 60, are not part of the people. They're also counted. As a matter of fact, we find that even the children were counted. They're all counted. And each one is God's child. And God considers precious. But when you talk about full-bodied people who go to war doesn't necessarily only mean physical war. It just means that they represent the front line. So they're not superior in any way, but the number is referring to the battles of life are driven by the 600,000. It's not the 600,000 individuals. It signifies a category. It's like an archetype. But everyone is part of it. And their wives and children and the elderly are all part of this group, with 600,000 symbolizing the so-called the prominent or the prime. Like when you say a person is a bchar, a firstborn. Firstborn has special quality, but it doesn't minimize the qualities of others. And the same thing here. In a sense, like 600,000, if you wish, leaders, if you can put it in that category. Okay. So that covers that. One more question about conversion. Let's already cover this as well. Dear Rabbi, thank you for your weekly broadcasts. I did tshuva when I was 19, 20 years old, and after a Chabad Shliach inquired into my roots, I, as well as my mother, undertook a doubtful conversion. It means a gir al pisafik, meaning not sure whether they're Jewish, so to make sure they went through a conversion, due to not knowing the exact status of her mother. I often think about this, and I'm not sure if I should look at myself as a ger or as a born yid, as a convert or as a born Jew. I'm considering getting a DNA test, as has been done by many Jews from the former Soviet Union. On one hand, I feel that these issues are important and I should have clarity as to where my roots originate. On the other hand, I know that after the doubtful conversion occurred, he's saying a doubtful conversion. It doesn't mean the conversion is doubtful. It's a conversion, when in doubt, you just convert and the conversion is complete certain. And I live an Orthodox life that this doesn't not really matter. I'm seeking your advice with this out of the ordinary question, especially if there's anywhere in sources you could refer me to. Thanks. So, yes, I agree with your conclusion. Absolutely. Once you've gone through a conversion, there's no reason to look back. You're a full, absolute Jew. Whether you were really a Jew before the conversion, you may never know because you don't know the circumstances. Your grandmother's not here to find out. So you did the right thing. And right now there's no reason to question it. I would not recommend a DNA test. It may show something, it may not show. Because the most important thing is that you're converted. DNA test does not, the person finds DNA that's Jewish, that's not enough to create a conversion. Because you could always say there's still a percentage. That's not Jewish roots. The point being is, be at peace. God loves you. You're a total Jew. Live up to your destiny and don't focus on the negatives or the unknowns or general negative thoughts. And forge ahead and fulfill your purpose in this life. That's my response to you. And I hope that's helpful. Okay. Let me go on. I will address an issue of difficult children. It's titled. Somebody asked like this: how should we deal with difficult and challenging children? How should we deal with children who reject their parents? So let me read in detail. How should we respond to children who say things that challenge us and our beliefs in the Torah? For our son's bar mitzvah, we brought him a new suit. He put it on a few hours early before the bar mitzvah. We asked him to please be careful and not get it dirty before we meet the photographer for pictures. But he was playing rough in the backyard and fell and dirtied and scraped up the suit. I reprimanded him and said, I asked you to please be careful and to not mess up the suit. And his response was that he was careful and didn't do anything wrong, and his suit was messed up because a group of shindalids rubbed against the material and wore it out. Shindalids are demons. This was direct challenge to my beliefs in the Torah because I told him I didn't believe his story. I would essentially be saying, because if I told him I didn't believe his story, I would essentially be saying I didn't believe what Chazal say in the Talmud, that clothes get worn out because demons rub up against them. So I would like to ask Rabbi Jacobson how I should respond to my son if my son tries something like this again in the future. Okay, so this is, I was going to first we'll talk about difficult children in a different context in a moment. Let's talk about this first. On this level, to be very honest, as a parent, yes, it may be annoying and may be upsetting, but children are children, and you always want to leave them with a positive experience, especially the day of his bar mitzvah. So I'm not condoning what he did was right, but I don't think that reprimanding him on that day would be right. You should have smiled, in my opinion, and said, okay, let's figure out what we can do, clean up the suit, or if need be, wear something else. Again, as much as it could be aggravating, and I'm not saying he did anything right, it's also you want to leave your child with a positive attitude. So he used that as an excuse because he was probably ashamed. So he used that as an excuse. So it's not your job is to start getting into a debate with a 13-year-old boy, whether it's shadim or not shadim, or you just simply were reckless and playing with children. So I would have taken the high road and not address it at all. Once it has been addressed, I would go and speak to him in a loving way. You don't want to leave a bad taste, especially in the day of a bar mitzvah. You want to encourage your son. You want to help him. And at some point, when there's more calm and in a peaceful way, not in a confrontational way, you could talk about this, if need be. I would frankly move on and try to avoid this whole topic and try to make the bar mitzvah, I don't know when this happened, and whatever relationship, because it's so easy to get stuck in your approach. You're saying that he offended you. I remember that I asked you, please be careful. It's not about you, the father. You want him to be the best he can be. And I've seen all kinds of negative things come about when parents are trying to impose. It could be good intentions. But you have to remember your child comes first. That doesn't mean you should accept everything. It doesn't mean you should overlook everything. But not focus so much on what you did to my standards. You disappointed me. It's not about you, the parent. It's about what's best for the child. That's my general response to this. And to create a loving relationship, you'll get a lot more, you'll achieve a lot more and achieve the results you want far faster than if you do it in a reprimanding way. Now, in a broader question, how should a person react in a loving way, but at the same time protect oneself from a toxic son or a daughter's rejection and lack of love? They refuse to communicate to try to find out why they are reacting in such a way to a parent who truly loves them. Okay, and I'll add one more question in this context. As I read earlier, where I spoke about dealing with difficult children who are rejecting our belief system or other challenges that they're presenting. So that is much broader than the one I just addressed, even though what I addressed also touches a bigger issue. But it all comes together. And here's what I want to say. Whenever I hear a question like this, I have to say immediately, my antenna go up, and I wonder, what would the child say? Is this a parent issue, or is it the child actually rejecting the parent? Sometimes parents behave in a way, and children don't have any way to defend themselves, so they reject the parent. I'm not suggesting that the child is doing right, but remember, it's a child. They may not have the tools. So I wonder how the parent is behaving. And if you saw the whole thing objectively, is there something to say to the parent? And I'm not trying to turn it around, but you have to hear a whole picture. Very often parents are very subjective, and when they feel a child is not behaving the right way, they blame the child. Sometimes you have to look at yourself. What are you doing? You're not perfect. I know it's not equals, parents and children. Kabbadas avicha v'semecha is a mitzvah to the child. But a child is still a child, and a parent has to be responsible. So if you see a parent who's very abusive, or a parent who's behaving in a very reckless way, and then the child is embarrassed of that. You hear stories, a parent comes home drunk. So what do you do with kibbud av then? You're embarrassed. You don't want your friends to see. You may reject your parent. You don't want others to see. So the parent will say, my child is rejecting me, but you haven't added one important thing. You were drunk. I'm just giving an example. And I'm not saying that's covering all the situations. I'm just giving one example. So you have to know the whole picture before we address it properly. And I will never address an issue without understanding the whole picture, because I can give you advice based on certain circumstances. But if the circumstances are different, it needs different type of advice. Now, if indeed, you'll say the parent, no one's perfect, but the parent did not provoke this. It's not coming due to the parent. And a child is going through what they go through. So as a parent, the first thing is you want to find out, why is your child behaving in this way? Whether it's obnoxious, whether it's chutzpahdik, whether it's rejecting you, what's going on? What's bothering the child? And again, I'm not looking to justify the behavior, just trying to understand it. A good parent wants to understand their child. So I would look to be sensitive, try to understand what's going on, especially if it's suddenly a shift. Your child is behaving in a way that was not the way they behaved till now. Where there's smoke, there's fire. There's probably a cause for it. And you want to find out before you reprimand, before you criticize. Now, if indeed you don't see anything that you can find, it's still your child. So the question then is how to maneuver. Do you go with discipline? Do you go harshly? Do you go with kindness and love? Case by case. Kindness and love is always the first option. If that doesn't work, then you should talk to an objective person who can come and look at the situation and understand this child. And no children are the same. There's no one size fits all. So you have to know that as well. And yes, parenting is a job, and parenting is difficult. Tsar gidul banim, it's not easy. So you have to really work at it. And if you're really loving and care, you'll come to a solution. You don't always have the solution immediately, but you'll know what you have to do. And hopefully the child will respond in kind if you create the right environment. The worst thing you want is to bring your own stuff, your own baggage into it. You don't want to get engaged in that type of thing where both what you're reciprocating or getting caught up in whatever your child is going through, whatever traumas or whatever challenges they're going through. So those are briefly the answers to this. And one of the reasons I chose to speak about this is based on what I said earlier about Rashbi, that on the day of Lag BaOmer, he was poiked HaKoros, which means he opened up the wombs. Blessings that opened up the wombs of mothers that could not have children. The Rebbe explains, as I mentioned, Lag BaOmer Tov Shemen, powerful thing that Lag BaOmer is a day also to open up channels between parents and children. So it's really about finding our deeper connection. At the end of the day, a healthy parent loves their child unconditionally. And a child loves the parent. And if there's something that's blocking that, let's find out what it is. Let's not impose our own toxins and our own traumas and our own negative stuff into the relationship. You want to separate the two and bring the love and the healthy part into it. That's what Rashbi is about. That is what Lag BaOmer is about. Now, due to time, I had other topics I would have loved to address, but we'll stop here. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 448, speaking specifically about Lag BaOmer. Everyone should have a simcha dike, a joyous celebrating Lag BaOmer. Let's draw down the schus of the Rashbi, Rabbi Shimeon Bar Yochai, who said, I'm able to absolve and free the world from all judgment and severity. And kedai Rabbi Shimeon lismech alav b'shas adchak. And it's worthwhile relying on Rabbi Shimeon in times of stress, in times of difficulty and challenge. And the the Munkin Shed. The Minchas Aloza says, B'shas goes on the Golus. That Rashbi is also, in his chus, we should get out of Golus. It says, in the Alter Rebbe says, and the Rab Hillel brings this, that by the Rashbi and Tzaddikim like him, there was no Churban. Even though it was after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, they were higher than Churban. So they bring us the taste of Geulah, which is the union of Pnimiyus and Nigla the Torah, the soul and the body. May we do our part in joining our soul and body in one fusion, serving God, fusion of B'chol Avavcha B'shnei Etzarecha, the animal soul, the divine soul, fulfilling our soul's mission in this world. Everyone should have a very Simcha Dika Lag BaOmer, and a Simcha Dika Yer, a Simcha Dika Tamid all the time. And may we be Zeiche on this Mattan Torah, Pnimiyus HaTorah, to the Gili of Torah Chadosh Amiti Teitze, Pnimiyus HaTorah, that will be revealed with the coming of Mashiach. Yelamed is Kol Elam Kule Torah, who will teach the entire nation Torah. Be well, and we're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Thank you so much.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.